Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Playtech TV. My name is Kevin and today we're going to be doing part 3 of our Beat a Console build, where we test out the rig that we have built. Now if you haven't watched part 1 or 2, I suggest you go back and watch them because that's where we'll be talking about the parts we used in the rig and actually built it up. But for today we're going to be doing testing and telling you about the overclocking we did with this rig, so let's get into it. Let's first talk about the overclocking. So we have the G3258 Pentium CPU, and also known as the Pentium K, which is a 2-core or dual-core Haswell CPU which is unlocked. So we managed to overclock this guy. Remember, it's on the stock cooler up to 4.5 gigahertz at 1.35 volts, which is a pretty good effort. Now heat-wise, I ran the Intel Extreme Tuning Utility benchmark on it to see how hot it would get, and it went up to 83 degrees Celsius, which is getting quite toasty, but I mean we got to 4.5 gigahertz, and remember that stock is 3.2 gigahertz, so pretty good job there. Now we also overclocked the GPU, which is the Gigabyte 260X in it, and we managed to get 1250 megahertz on the GPU core. The default is 1188 megahertz, so a little bit of a jump up there. However, memory wise we got quite a large jump up to 1550 megahertz over the default, which is 1250 megahertz, so that was quite good. And in the Unigine Valley Extreme HD benchmark, it managed to only go up to 72 degrees Celsius at 68% fan speed, so temperature wise on the GPU was still doing really well, so I think that was pretty good as far as overclocking went. Now let's talk about noise, and noise wise, as I just said, the GPU only went up to 68%, so that was pretty fine. It was about average for a gaming PC, you know, nothing particularly good, but it wasn't bad, it wasn't too loud, way better than most consoles, you would say, so that's what we were aiming for anyway, so it does pretty good in terms of noise. I mean, this isn't the most noise insulating case out there, that's for sure, but it still did a decent job. Now let's move on to performance, since that's the main event with this guy, since this is a Beat a Console build. But let's first talk about the consoles. So to beat the consoles, what we decided was that it had to play every game at 1080p and average around 60 frames per second. That's to beat the Xbox One, which will run quite a few games at 720p or 900p at 60 frames per second, or some games at 1080p but only at 30 frames per second, and the PlayStation 4, which will run a few games at 1080p and 60 frames per second, but quite a few more at 1080p at 30 frames per second, and some games only at 900p. So let's get into the benchmarks then, and the first one I did was Tomb Raider. So on the Ultra preset with everything maxed out 1080p, it was averaging 51.2 frames per second average, which is a really good effort. Dropping it down to high, at 1080p, it was managing 65.6 frames per second average, so above 60, a really good job there. Now BioShock Infinite, this was on Ultra, everything maxed out 1080p. It managed 57.1 average frames per second, so almost 60, very close to it. And on the very high preset at 1080p, it was managing 66.2 average frames per second, so a really solid job there. And now Shadow of Mordor, so this is quite a high requirement game, and as such, the rig only managed 48.2 frames per second on high at 1080p. However, when we dropped it down to medium, it was managing 59.8 frames per second average, so a really solid job there. And by comparison, the Xbox One runs it at 900p at 30 frames per second, and the PlayStation 4 runs it at 1080p but only at 30 frames per second. So our Beat a Console build did exactly that. It absolutely smashed the Xbox One, and it still beat the PlayStation 4 and did a pretty good job there too. So I was fairly happy with the performance. It does a really good job. Which brings us now to the conclusion. So our Beat a Console build did really well. I was really impressed with it. So these graphics settings were the same or higher than what the consoles can do, and they were all averaging around 60 frames per second. If you only wanted to go for 30 frames per second, you'd be able to bump a lot of these graphics settings up even higher as well. So it does that really good. Plus, being PC, you have a lot of games that you can't get on consoles. Plus you get Steam, which has a lot of free games in it as well, and all the Steam summer sales and all the different other sales they have on Steam, which is really good, so you can get games for really cheap. And also, being a PC, you get its availability to do lots of other things, you know, just browsing the web, all the applications that work with it, just a full PC as well as being your gaming rig. So that's another big plus for this build. Now, I hope you guys have enjoyed this series. Let us know down in the comments below if you want us to do another one on the other end of the scale, you know, using quite expensive parts and doing a more extravagant type build. We'd really like to know, and I've really enjoyed doing this series. So let us know in the comments below if you want to see us do more of these in the future. As always, subscribe to Playtech TV and like the video. And as always, I'll see you guys next time.